surrounding this case is part of a small but very vociferous right-wing, I would say centre right-wing party, whose popularity is growing because they, more than any other party, have highlighted the problems that the United Kingdom are facing with crimes, especially rape crimes, perpetrated by illegal immigrants.
Thank you.
The silent majority, who for decades have been blissfully unaware of what we call the grooming gangs in the UK, have started to understand that their communities are threatened. And this is a very important subject which will certainly probably be the main issue facing the United Kingdom in the upcoming local elections, let alone the general election, which is some 3 years away. So naturally, the populist party, the Reform Party, which is riding high in the polls, is leveraging up on this. Of that, there's no doubt. Having said that, it has been an absolute scandal within UK society that such organised rapes committed by grooming gangs from the Pakistani community have for decades been ignored by the media, the police, the judiciary, and local and government legislators. So it is an important issue, and because the immigrant community is growing in the UK, the illegal immigrant community, I must say, I'm sure you're aware of the boatloads of people coming in from France illegally. Local communities feel under threat. Now, I would add one other thing to this. If the UK were experiencing economic positivity, I would guess that this would not be such an issue. But because the UK are experiencing dire economic conditions, unemployment high, job vacancies on a downward trajectory, inflation relatively high, and a public welfare bill that has gone completely out of control, then clearly a case like this, being given high profile, will serve as an issue for politicians to leverage up on.
Now, given that the UK does not track crime by immigration or asylum status, how can policymakers and the media responsibly report on cases involving migrants without inflaming public fears or perpetuating stereotypes?
Well, it's interesting. You're absolutely correct in saying that as a matter of course, crimes committed by certain ethnic groups are not readily available. However, by the Freedom of Information Act, such information is available, and one can see from various communities, Somali community, Pakistani community, etc., the kinds of crimes being committed. So it's not an absolute truth to say that the information is not available. And when it does become, and when it is made available by the populist parties, then it's quite staggering the type of crime, which types of crime are perpetrated by certain ethnic communities and groups within the UK society. For example, child rape amongst certain ethnic groups is very, very high as a percentage amongst other ethnic groups. Burglaries, intermarriage within the family. So all kinds of statistical data is available, but one has to ask for a freedom of information request, which is quite hard to obtain. And you're quite right in saying that the government does not make such statistical data readily available to the public.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Baum for joining us and sharing that deep insight with us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, thank you.
Now that's all we have time for today's episode of Deep Dive. Stay tuned to NewsX World.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, And India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. We'll start with a check of the top headlines this hour. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he raises the Jimmy Lai case and Uyghur rights with the President of China, Xi Jinping. He also said talks make progress on trade, travel and resetting UK-China relations. Iran says its armed forces are ready to respond immediately to any US strike. The warning comes as President Trump reiterates military threats and US forces deployed to the region. European Union foreign ministers are expected to list Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist group. The move follows a deadly crackdown on protests, European Union's top diplomat says. Two US federal agents involved in the fatal shooting of intensive care nurse Alex Pretty during an immigration operation in Minneapolis have been placed on administrative leave as per the DHS. The move follows a national outrage over the death and comes as protests and scrutiny of federal enforcement continue. Israel's parliament gives initial approval to the 2026 state budget, averting an immediate early election. The spending plan still faces a tough final vote amid coalition divisions. Dozens are killed after RSF drones hit the town of Diling in South Kordofan. Local media report the strikes target military positions and a central market. China executes 11 people linked to Myanmar-based scam gangs. As per state media reports, Beijing says the move targets key figures in cross-border cybercrime. A plane crash in northeast Colombia kills all 15 on board, including a local lawmaker. The aircraft loses contact minutes after departing Qatar for a short flight to Okina. All right, on to the top focus now. We're looking at US now. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers, that's the ICE officers in Minnesota, have been given new operational instructions directing them not to engage with agitators during enforcement actions following two deadly shootings of US citizens earlier this month. However, under the new guidelines, officers are now instructed to focus only on immigrants with criminal charges or convictions. ICE agents are required to use megaphones to issue clear commands and prioritize arrests linked to criminal activity. This policy shift follows the fatal shooting of Alex Pretty, with an exclusive video obtained by American media outlet that shows his confrontation with ICE officers before his death. Furthermore, the change aligns with President Trump's efforts to de-escalate tension in the state after the controversial shootings. Joining me now in this discussion is Madhav Nalapat. He's the editorial director at the Sunday Guardian and joins us from New Delhi. Mr. Nalapat, thanks very much for joining me. Do you think the new guidelines that have come in are rather too late? Did two people really have to die for Trump to reflect and issue these new directives?
Well, I'd like to point out that so far as the ICE shootings are concerned, I think a majority of American citizens have had their conscience stirred, and I'm talking also of MAGA elements. The fact is that this is, in ICE officers believe, they're like, oh, 007, they can get away with murder. And many of them have precisely done that. They have gotten away with murder because Homeland Secretary Kristi Noem is basically giving blanket immunity to them by always defending their acts. Now, finally, I think the White House is awakened to the fact that this is proving very unpopular with American people when they see American citizens being shot down in cold blood by what looks like commandos from another planet almost, then I think the American citizens also are turning against the tactics of ICE, and as a consequence, they are basically becoming hostile to President Trump. So that's why the White House had to soften its tone, especially after the Preeti shooting, when a person was gunned down in cold blood, and Christine Noem wrongly said that he pulled a gun. But actually, none of the visuals show that he pulled any gun. He was shot in cold blood. In fact, he raised his hands in surrender when he was shot. So the reality of the situation is this is proving highly unpopular with the American public, and as a consequence, the White House is having to backtrack, and that's why now they're going softer on that. That is going to stop ICE from carrying out these almost murderous attacks on innocent citizens on suspicion that they're foreign immigrants or not. And even if you're a foreigner and you're a visitor in the United States, you will be subject to this kind of horrible treatment. So now the United States is no longer a safe country to go to. As a consequence, tourist footfalls have fallen very sharply. And overall, I would like to say that something better be done about ICE. Otherwise, the White House is going to face serious problem in the 2026 midterms. Thank you.
Right, Madhav Nalapet, that's exactly my next question to you was, given the statements that have come in from Kristi Noem, she's accused Rennie Good of weaponizing her car, then said for invoking domestic terrorism charges on her, and the actions of ICE and the federal versus state control that the conversation, that these incidents have erupted a conversation on. How much do you think is going to impact the midterms?
Look, again, now let's not turn to Greenland. And where Greenland is concerned, I'd like to say that President Trump wants Greenland. Denmark has control over Greenland, and the entire European Union and the UK are joined together in opposing that. So I think President Trump is having to backtrack quite a bit on this. I don't know what he wants from Greenland, most likely the rare earths or something else like that, but he can do that in a much better way than threatening and bullying and cajoling. And of course, I mean, force is absolutely off the table. If force is used at the end of NATO, but even now the behavior of President Trump, where he is selectively joining some wars that the rest of NATO are involved in or selectively not joining, NATO is effectively a split organization. So I want to point out, as far as Greenland is concerned, I think there's a united front of the EU and a united front including the UK, where it's very, very clear that Greenland must be.
We were still discussing the ICE shootings. I'm sorry, I'd have to interrupt you there. I was asking you about how these ICE shootings and the fatal killings and the statements that have come in from Kristi Noem and Trump himself are going to impact his midterm prospects.
Look, I mean, the Danish foreign minister and the other high officials are expressing a lot of satisfaction and confidence. They don't want to provoke President Trump anymore. They know that if you express something which he doesn't like, he may get provoked and take even extreme actions. So that is a problem. So they're speaking in very diplomatic language, but at the same time, frankly, I think the United States under President Trump, what they want is much more than what the Danes are prepared to give. So I think sooner or later, one or the other side will have to relent. And in my view, judging from the international situation and the international outcry over Greenland, it'll have to be the United States under President Trump. I think overall the Trump administration is making itself deeply unpopular in the European Union and of course in the UK and also now within the local population of the United States because of the ICE killings in so many locations, including that absolutely point-blank murder of Preeti in Minneapolis. And so I want to point out that President Trump better change his ways, or the American voter who voted for him just 1 year ago will have changed their mind by the midterms and vote against him and his party. And that's going to be a disaster for the Republicans. It'll be a disaster for him, because then he'll be a lame duck president for the remainder of his term. Thank you.
Right. Thanks very much, Mr. Nalapuden, for joining us in this discussion. And moving ahead, viewers, let's give you the latest on Greenland now. Talks between Denmark, Greenland and the United States over the Arctic territory have been described as constructive by Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen. Speaking ahead of a meeting with European Union counterparts in Brussels, Rasmussen said discussions held on Wednesday went well but had not yet produced any conclusions. He added that he was slightly more optimistic than he had been a week earlier. The diplomatic talks follow months of tension between Denmark and the United States, both NATO allies. The strained relations were triggered by repeated demands from US President Donald Trump to take over Greenland, a move strongly rejected by Denmark and Greenlandic leaders. All right, we now move on. Viewers, now British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says that he raised the human rights concerns during his talks in Beijing today. To discuss the trial of Hong Kong pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai as well as China's broader human rights record. He said the conversation with China's leadership was respectful and frank, stressing that stronger ties must allow room for disagreement. Starmer added that engaging China creates opportunities for cooperation while also making space for open dialogue on sensitive issues. His comments come as London seeks a more stable and constructive relationship with Beijing. Joining me now in this discussion is Collins.
He raised those issues as you would expect. Part of the rationale for engagement is to make sure that we can both seize the opportunities that are available, which is what we've done, but also have a mature discussion about issues that we disagree on.
All right, viewers, before we are joined in by our guest, let's give you more details on this meet between Starmer and Xi Jinping. Of course, the issue of visa-free travel has seen some progress in this visit. Whiskey tariffs were also discussed. Those are some of course, the key pointers. But the meeting between the two leaders, of course, is a rather crucial one. A lot of updates, in fact, coming in. The relationship is in good and strong place, is what Starmer said after productive talks with Xi. And the Prime Minister, of course, said that progress has been made on whiskey tariffs and visa-free travel to China, and also raised the jailing of Jimmy Lai with Xi Jinping. The PM also said that the countries will maintain frank and open dialogue on areas of disagreements. Xi, meanwhile, said that there have been twists and turns in China-UK ties, but went on to say that engagement is unavoidable. Let's in fact now welcome Collins Chong-Yu-Keat, who is a Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst and joins us from Kuala Lumpur. Collins, thanks very much for joining us. Firstly, what do you think are some of the biggest takeaways from the meeting between the two leaders, and how are they going to tread on this newly strengthened bilateral relationship?
Well, both sides will tread this carefully. We have seen how both have been careful not to also sideline traditional partners, especially with the case of UK. UK is trying to de-risk without fully decoupling, and of course also China will want to see what are the red lines being set by the UK in terms of these discussions. And of course also we've seen how Beijing is also trying to gauge the positions of Starmer, and we have seen also the need for UK to consolidate further economic integration, especially now the economic conditions of the UK has not been promising. And also, the issues being raised here in terms of Jimmy Lai, in terms of, in Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. This is also part of a strategic move, by Starmer to ensure that, to also appease domestic audience and, domestic needs. He wants to show that, these relations can be maintained on talking terms, but without also compromising on the stance on human rights, on also on these difficult issues. And of course, this will need to be raised. But as I've stated, I don't see this as a stumbling block to both sides. And of course, this is part of the needed, as part of the continuation of the needed issues that would need to be raised by the UK without being seen as selling out the traditional stance of the UK in terms of these issues. But the main prominent points will be on resetting talks on a new way forward in terms of economic partnership, in terms of critical sectors, but on sensitive sectors, including on tech restrictions on semiconductor and chips, these are also being, they have to tread carefully on this, especially with the new pressure by Washington, and of course also Beijing is trying to capitalize on this to send a very promising message to the global south, to its current and allies, that it still has this friend in the UK, despite the moves by the Trump administration to enforce greater pressure on Beijing.
Yeah. And how do you think really the US will be watching this meeting going ahead, and the relationship between China and the UK?
Well, as I've stated, this is expected, and I don't see this as to raise an alarming, kind of, sign to the Trump administration. Then we have seen how this is not, only being confined to the case of the UK. We have seen this has happened before in the case of France, in the case of Canada, and of course all nations will want also to seek greater fallback options, and of course also for friend-sharing efforts. To safeguard their own economic interests in amidst these new uncertainties, and also potential strains in the ties with the US in terms of securing this promising economic future. But of course also these nations, especially the UK and Canada and other European nations, will need also to tread this carefully in terms of also not to be seen as selling out the need to have this kind of the importance of the security ties with the US. So they have been capitalizing on this strategic hedging with more careful manner now, and we have seen also how despite this overture to China in terms of resetting ties, this security umbrella, security partnership with the US still remains strong. Of course, London would still need to depend on the US in terms of having this security partnership, but on the economic partnership, you need to explore greater, in terms of platforms, in terms of confidence, in terms of trust, and in terms of also expanding the market access and other economic benefits that will be of great importance to the UK, especially in this timeline.
Sure. Collins, one final question so long as we are on this discussion. How do you see UK's economy gaining really if trade boosts with China? Of course, the country is seeing its economy in doldrums right now. How much can it gain from these strengthened ties?
Well, I don't see any kind of promising real-time gains, especially during the initial timeline. This is just a very preliminary stage, to, of course, to have this kind of mutual agreements on what will be the key areas that will need to have further improvements without infringing on the sensitive areas that will be of great importance to both sides. And of course, China is still probing what are the red lines being set by Britain, and of course we have seen how also sensitive sectors will need to be protected, and the need also to be seen to be aligned with the greater support or efforts by Washington in terms of restricting Chinese access to these technologies. Of course, also with regards to the sanctions in place on energy, and how this will also will be important for the UK not to be seen as alluding or to be agreeable to these efforts or any actions taken by China that will be of great risk or harm to the Western Hemisphere as a whole. So there are a lot of this pressure in place. There's a lot of restrictions. a lot of uncertainties and for both to navigate further. But this is the first step being taken after years of these relations being in the doldrum, and of course both will want to seek greater confidence in moving forward and to have these mutual benefits. But I don't see this to be beyond the optics that we have seen. To have any tangible benefits, especially to Britain, it will still need to rely very much on the conventional methods for now, and to reassure allies in Europe, and of course to reassure the Trump administration that this is not something that is at the expense of the other.
Right. All right, Collins, thanks for your comments. They are requested to stay on. Moving ahead now, viewers, Vietnam and the European Union have pledged to deepen economic and security cooperation, upgrading their diplomatic relationship to hedge against an increasingly unpredictable United States. European Council President Antonio Costa has said that the European Union are elevating Vietnam relationship to the highest level of a comprehensive strategic partnership. However, Vietnam's President Luong Quoc has called the upgrade to Vietnam's highest level partnership as a new landmark reflecting sincere and mutual trust. Let's first listen in to what Antonio Costa and then Luong Quoc had to say.
A significant new milestone. We are elevating our relationship to the highest level, a comprehensive and strategic partnership. This upgrade fully captures the depth and breadth of our collaboration to date and our expectations for its future evolution on trade, on green and digital transition, on security, on people-to-people ties.
Nâng cấp quan hệ và chuyến thăm quan trọng này cũng là những minh chứng sinh động cho đường lối đối ngoại đa phương hóa, đa dạng hóa quan hệ của Việt Nam. Coi EU là một trong những đối tác quan trọng hàng đầu trên thế giới và mong muốn tiếp tục thúc đẩy và làm sâu sắc hơn nữa quan hệ với EU.
All right, I request Collins to join us back in this discussion. Collins, what we are seeing right now is that European Union is clearly leaving no stone unturned in strengthening its ties with all the emerging economies. We had the India-European Union trade agreement, and now, of course, elevating the partnership with Vietnam. What is really the continent planning?
Well, this is also part of the efforts to, as I've stated, also with what the UK has been doing now, and France and Canada, and now, of course, the EU is also trying to have this installation in terms of these fallback options to diversify economic support in anticipating this greater pressure in terms of protectionist measures, in terms of also uncertainties coming from Washington. This is also part of the broader efforts to have this kind of multi-alignment strategy, hedging, and to see this part of the world, Southeast Asia and ASEAN, as the new gateway. And of course, also we have seen also this is also a continuation of this conventional plans to expand market access and to secure the supply chain resilience, energy transition, and critical sectors also. Of course, and that will include semiconductors, critical minerals, and all that. So Vietnam has always been at the forefront of these ventures, and also the location of Vietnam as being seen as a part of the also China +1 strategy, and this will the EU needed this very much, especially now, and we have seen how this is also needed by Vietnam in terms of expanding market access, technologies, investments, and for EU sees Vietnam as also a new gateway to ASEAN apart from Malaysia, in terms of solidifying supply chain to get also the needed market access and the support system in terms of these new sectors of the economy. So it's a mutually beneficial venture for both sides, and it's hardly surprising. And also the importance of Vietnam as the connector between continental Southeast Asia and maritime Southeast Asia, connecting South Asia, Central Asia, to South China Sea and to the Pacific. And of course, this is also being looked into in the long term as to the new potential values of Vietnam in this equation.
Right, Collins, thanks very much then for weighing in your opinion on this. And we now move on, viewers. As always, before we wrap up the bulletin, some technology news. Now, Microsoft shares have dropped over 6% after the company reported slower cloud revenue growth in its fiscal second quarter. Regardless of spending a record $37.5 billion on capital expenditure, including a significant investment in AI, Microsoft's cloud revenue growth only met analysts' expectations with a 39% rise. Meanwhile, increasing competition from Google's Gemini and other AI initiatives is threatening Microsoft's market share. CEO Satya Nadella, however, disclosed that Microsoft now has 15 million annual users for M365 Copilot, but investors remain concerned about the rising costs of memory chips and AI investments. Furthermore, Microsoft's capital spending is expected to decrease in the next quarter, although its cloud business backlog has more than doubled to $625 billion. However, about 45% of this backlog is linked to OpenAI, raising concerns about Microsoft's reliance on its partner. And viewers, that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer meets Chinese President Xi Jinping to discuss trade, security and human rights. Both sides call for stronger ties amid global uncertainty. Iran says its armed forces are ready to respond immediately to any US strike. The warning comes as President Trump reiterates military threats and US forces to deploy to the region. 2 US federal agents involved in the fatal shooting of intensive care nurse Alex Pretty during an immigration operation in Minneapolis have been placed on leave. The move follows national outrage over the death and comes as protests and scrutiny of the federal enforcement continue. China executes 11 people linked to Myanmar-based scam gangs. Beijing says the move targets key figures in cross-border cybercrime. A plane crash in northeast Colombia kills all 15 on board, including a local lawmaker. The aircraft loses contact minutes after departing Calcutta for a short flight to Okana. Russian drone attacks in southern Ukraine kill 3 people, regional officials have stated. The strikes hit overnight as the war continues. US Fed Chair Jerome Powell calls a Supreme Court case over Trump's effort to fire a Fed governor a historic threat. He also says he believes the central bank will remain independent. Thailand's foreign minister says Myanmar's recent election could mark the start of a transition to peace. Rights groups continue to criticize the polls as credibility concerns persist. We start in the Middle East, and Iran has issued a sharp warning to the United States today, saying any military strike would trigger an immediate and forceful response. The Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, has said Iran's forces have their fingers on the trigger after President Trump warned that time is running out to avoid confrontation and said a large US naval force is moving closer to the country. Despite the threats, Araghchi said Tehran remains open to a new nuclear deal, insisting Iran seeks peaceful nuclear technology and not nuclear weapons. Hardline voices in Tehran warned that any attack would mean war, including strikes on Israel. Meanwhile, European pressure is growing. Germany says Iran's leadership lacks legitimacy, and France backed new EU sanctions and a possible terror designation for Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Joining us now is Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev, a former Indian diplomat, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador. Trump here says time is running out, echoing the maximum pressure of the previous few weeks. Does this suggest that this contradiction that also is strategic, or is this escalation to gain leverage for diplomatic negotiations?
Thank you for having me, and I'm delighted to be with you once again. You've asked a very important question, and I think many people would like that to be answered one way or the other. It's only future that is going to tell that, but to my mind, both sides are saber-rattling and engaging in pyrotechnics to show to their own respective domestic audience that they're not buckling down. They insist on their hardline stance. To quote Axios periodical on internet, which has close links with the United States, U.S. has asked for 4 conditions to be fulfilled. Firstly, the nuclear program, enrichment program of Iran has to be totally abandoned, and the enriched uranium has to be handed over. Then the proxies have to be reined in, and the missile program also has to avoid the long-range missile systems. Now, Iran relies for its defense on all these 4 criteria. It has seen that while Saddam Hussein was mauled by United States in aggression repeatedly, North Korea was left standing because it had nuclear powers. Then again, the missiles have been its weapon of choice, because its Air Force and air defense systems have been denuded over the sanctions and rest of it. So, and the proxies have, according to it, have safeguarded Iran to a great extent by taking the war to its enemies in various parts of the region, Israel specifically. So it is reluctant to abandon those 4 tenets, and for the same reason, United States want them to be fulfilled, and Iran to be neutered, so as to avoid any threat to Pax Americana in the Middle East region. So both sides are sticking to their guns. President Trump faces a tough midterm election in November, and has often criticized his predecessors for dragging in the wars, long, unending wars in the Middle East. he has no intention to get dragged into a longish conflict with Iran.
Yes.
And Iranians have said that they intend to prolong the conflict in case it's brought to bear upon them. Thank you.
And Ambassador, of course, the relevant targets have been stated by Iran. If they are indeed attacked, they've said that they're going to target US bases in the Middle East, those in Qatar, among others. And also, Israel will be a legitimate target for Iran if the United States does indeed strike. How close is this standoff to becoming a multi-front regional war?
Many of the regional countries hate being sucked into this vortex. UAE and Saudi Arabia both have announced in the recent times, during the last 1 week, that they would not allow their territories, maritime areas, to be used for aggressing against Iran. This is because they perceive that Iran would attack them if they do that, if they allow United States access to their boundaries. What you have said is correct, but Iran has escalated it beyond. Its strategy is to attack not only US bases, but also threaten the countries which would allow those bases to be territories to be airspace to be used. Then again, it also has implicit threat that if its oil exports are not allowed, then it might as well block Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly a third of global maritime oil trade passes. So that would send oil prices rising. Once again, not a very wholesome prospect as Mr. Trump runs up to an election at home, where inflation is going to be one of the main sort of planks. So all that put together makes it, barring accidents, barring miscalculations, and a war, total war at that, unlikely. At the same time, Mr. Trump is quite prone to take symbolic military action before the other side has succumbed to some diplomatic sort of decline in its terms and resiled from the previous hardline stance, and then claim credit for it.
Okay.
So one cannot rule out some kind of symbolic high-octane gesture by Mr. Trump, now that he has his armada in place, just before Iran announces the agreement for renegotiating certain planks of bilateral standoff.
Ambassador Sachdev, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on these issues. We now turn to Southeast Asia, and in a crackdown on telecom fraud, China executed 11 individuals linked to Myanmar-based scam compounds. Meanwhile, these criminals, including key gang members, were sentenced to death for crimes like homicide, fraud, and unlawful detention. The fraud operations, which have stolen billions globally, initially targeted Chinese speakers but have expanded internationally. These Chinese authorities have stepped up regional cooperation to fight these scams. Last year, 5 more individuals were sentenced to death for similar offences tied to Myanmar's Kokang region. Joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Satoru Nagao. He is a fellow at the Hudson Institute and he joins us live from Tokyo. Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us. China, of course, has now executed at least 16 individuals over the past year linked to these Myanmar-based scam operations. Is Beijing's use of executions a deterrent that is working?
Working or not is very controversial, but anyways, this mafia commit crime is true. Traditionally, they are committing many traditional crime, for example, the gambling, the prostitution, etc., etc. But this mafia committed a new type of the crime, which is online fraud. So that's why many people kidnapped as a worker and committed online frauds, and some escaped. So that's why the track by the escaped people, the China and Myanmar side identify where is the base of this mafia. But so to deterrence purpose, of course, cracking down the crime mafia is, of course, a common way. What is even if the cracking down in the border between China and Myanmar, of course, this crime mafia can relocate the places between Myanmar and Thailand, Myanmar and Laos, Myanmar and Cambodia, something like that. There are many other border area which government forces cannot easy to cracking down. So that's why the relocation could happen. And at the same time, in case of the Myanmar, Myanmar is under civil war. So not only the border area, but also the other area also the candidate to be the place for crime. So that's why the cracking down is necessary, but at the same time, how to deter or dissuade, indeed, under the current situation, it is not easy.
And Beijing is increasing cross-border cooperation and pressure on neighbouring states to do these crackdowns. Is China gradually positioning itself as a de facto regional law enforcement power?
Of course, the great power should take charge into cracking down illegal crime activity. That is true. But at the same time, the problem is, of course, countries should respect sovereignty too. So that's why this is controversial. Of course, who will lead? In this case, the country who can enough power should lead. But the cooperative manner, that is good. But in some cases, government and government in a different country face problem to deal with common issue. So that's why if the China lead and expanding China's influence, of course, cracking down against the crime is good, but at the same time, other national security issue also could emerge. That is the matter.
Indeed. Do stay with us, Dr. Nagao, as we move on to our next story. And we move to the Taiwan Strait, and Taiwan's Marine Corps and its Haifeng Brigade, a land-based anti-ship missile unit, have conducted a series of military exercises incorporating attack and reconnaissance drones. This is part of their annual combat readiness drill, timed strategically ahead of the Lunar New Year. The exercises are designed to ensure the military is prepared for potential threats and to demonstrate Taiwan's capabilities in defending its territory. Meanwhile, Haifeng's brigade captain and section leader have reacted. Let's listen in to what they had to say.
目标的监侦、锁定、追踪，然后完成我们所谓的战斗识别、精确识别之后，最后导引飞弹，实施精准攻击。当然，这个时候还没结束，精准攻击完毕后，我们还要实施所谓的 BDA， 也就是战场评估。 这个时候，监侦型无人机的任务才算告一段落。
面对中共持续灰色地带袭扰，我们全体官兵将强化勤监侦、机动部署与临机应处的能力，落实平战一体。而我亦将持续带领区队的弟兄姊妹稳定成长，全力以赴坚守岗位，为守护海江安全与确保战备任务圆满完成，持续奉献心力。
Dr. Nagao joins us once again. Dr. Nagao, what does this say about the readiness that Taiwan is preparing for right now, given the perspective of possibly a military invasion by China, which of course has been floated over the past few years?
We should not forget the asymmetrical power balance between China and Taiwan. China has rich resources, luxury military forces. Numerically, China has the advantage. So in case of Taiwan, how to deal with China is a matter. And of course, Taiwan's strong point is, of course, geography. There is a sea between two and the mountains. But this is not enough to deal with China's latest weapons. So Taiwan should focusing on new type of the battle, and which focusing on drones is matter. Because the number is small, but even if the small number can control the many drones, in this case, it looks like that this is a bigger forces. So that's why the drone is matter. From reconnaissance to attack, many drones is used in the Russia versus Ukraine. And in Ukraine is far smaller than Russia, still Ukraine is fighting because of this kind of the new type of the weapons. So when China invade Taiwan, Taiwan deal with China by using many drones. And in case of the Taiwan, this is advantage because many chips to use for the drones is made in Taiwan. So that's why this is indeed very strong advantage that Taiwan has. So asymmetrical power balance is one thing, but to deal with this, Taiwan focusing on drone and now showing how to use is a demonstration. The Taiwan demonstration to show Taiwan's strong will and practical tactics to deal with this bigger power, which is China.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to talk to you, of course. We now move on, and top diplomats from across Southeast Asia have gathered in the Philippine city of Cebu as ASEAN convened its first meeting of 2026. The envoys posed for a family photo ahead of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers retreat hosted by the Philippines. Opening the meeting, Philippine Foreign Minister Teresa Lazaro said the global geopolitical and security environment has become more challenging, complex and interconnected. Her remarks set the tone for discussions expected to focus on regional stability, security concerns and cooperation amid rising global uncertainty. The meeting marks the start of ASEAN's diplomatic agenda for this year as member states seek to strengthen unity and navigate an evolving international landscape. Let's take a listen in.
Security challenges facing ASEAN have not only grown, but have also evolved and diversified. The global geopolitical security environment has not only become more challenging, but it's also become more complex and interconnected. Across our region, we continue to see tensions at sea, protracted internal conflicts, and unresolved border and humanitarian concerns.
At the same time, developments beyond Southeast Asia, including unilateral actions that carry cross-regional implications, continue to affect regional stability and erode multilateral institutions and the rules-based international order.
And this underscored the enduring importance of ASEAN's time-honored principles of restraint, dialogue, and adherence to international law in seeking to preserve peace and stability to our peoples. Our meeting today allows us to collectively take stock of ASEAN's priorities and exchange views on regional and global developments that directly affect us.
NVIDIA CEO Jason Huang says he is hopeful China will approve sales of the company's powerful H200 AI chip today. Huang made the remarks after visiting China, where he met customers, partners and government officials before arriving in Taipei. He said the license for the H200 is being finalized and that decision is being made by Chinese authorities and is now being awaited. Huang stressed the chip strengthens American technology leadership and benefits Chinese customers who are eager to access it. He added, NVIDIA wait patiently for a favorable outcome from Beijing. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start with a check of the top headlines this hour. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he raised the Jimmy Lai case and Uyghur rights with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He also says talks made progress on trade, travel and resetting UK-China relations. Iran says its armed forces are ready to respond immediately to any US strike. The warning comes as President Trump reiterates military threats and US forces deploy to the region. European Union foreign ministers are expected to list Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist group. The move follows a deadly crackdown on protests, European Union's top diplomat says. Two US federal agents involved in the fatal shooting of intensive care nurse Alex Pretty during an immigration operation in Minneapolis have been placed on administrative leave as per the DHS. The move follows national outrage over the death and comes as protests and scrutiny of federal enforcement continue. Israel's parliament gives initial approval to the 2026 state budget, averting an immediate early election. The spending plan still faces a tough final vote amid coalition divisions. Dozens are killed after RSF drones hit the town of Dilling in South Kordofan. As per local media reports, the strikes target military positions and a central market. China executes 11 people linked to Myanmar-based scam gangs. As the state media reports, Beijing says the move targets key figures in cross-border cybercrime. A plane crash in northeast Colombia kills all 15 on board, including a local lawmaker. The aircraft loses contact minutes after departing Cúcuta for a short flight to Ochana. All right, viewers, on to the top focus now on this bulletin. The Turkish foreign minister has said that Turkey will offer to help resolve tension between Washington and Tehran with Iran's top diplomat visits. This comes as Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is expected to meet his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi on Friday. Meanwhile, according to reports, Turkey is considering contingency plans along its border if the United States attacks Iran. Reports suggest that if the US attacks and the regime falls, Turkey plans to enforce a stronger border security measures. This includes increasing deployment of technological border systems and boosting troop numbers. Turkey, which shares a 530-kilometer border with Iran, has long opposed military action against the Islamic Republic. Peter Beom, editor at the Weekly Blitz, joins me in this discussion from London. Peter, thanks very much. Of course, Turkey continues to be a close ally of both the parties. How tough is this mediation for the country going to be?
Yeah, now this is very important for Turkey. Let me explain why. As we've seen in the last few weeks, Turkey has been the prime mediator between the Trump administration and the Iranians. The last thing, and why? The last things the Turks want is a war to break out between the US and Iran, because that will mean that hundreds of thousands of Iranians will leave Iran and go into Turkey. Turkey knows from previous experience, for example in Syria, that thousands and thousands of Syrians came into Turkey. They could not be accommodated, and one of the reasons Turkey was so insistent on backing the new Syrian regime was to ensure that the flow of Syrians back to Turkey happened. The last thing that Turkey wants at the moment is for Iranians to cross the border. Now, don't forget, the border between Iran and Syria is something like 540 kilometers, about 340 miles. It's to the east of Turkey and to the northwest of Iran, and it's a very, very mountainous region. But nevertheless, if war breaks out, thousands of Iranians will make the journey and cross that border and go into Turkey, which is something the Turks do not want to happen at any cost. And that's why not only are they threatening to reinforce the border, but they're doing it as we speak. It's not a question of when. They are actually going through the motions now of increasing border security. But it's a very, very difficult border to patrol because, as I've said, it's very long and very, very mountainous.
Right, Peter, to stay on with us as we now give some more information to our viewers. The European Union foreign ministers are also expected to agree today to list Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization. This comes after a deadly crackdown on mass protests in Iran. The decision will be made during a meeting in Brussels, where the ministers will discuss further measures in response to the Iranian regime's actions. Let's in fact listen in to what a European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas had to say.
The main topic is Iran. We are putting new sanctions on the list, and I also expect that we agree on listing the Iran Revolutionary Guard on the terrorist list. This will put them on the same footing with Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Daesh. If you act as a terrorist, you should also be treated as terrorist.
Meanwhile, Kallas has also stated that she could not imagine European Union countries creating a separate army among recent calls for a European force, including from European Defence Commissioner Andrius Kubilius. Earlier this week, NATO boss Mark Rutte dismissed calls by some leading European politicians for a separate European army, prompted by doubts over Donald Trump's commitment to the continent's security that were heightened by tension over Greenland. Let's listen in to Kallas's statements.
Well, every European country has an army, and 23 countries' armies are also part of NATO structures. So I can't imagine that countries will create a separate European army. So it has to be the armies that already exist. So we need to see how that works in practice. For me, it is understandable that in military you have to have a very straight and understandable chain of command, so that whenever something happens, it's clear who gives orders to whom. If we create parallel structures, then it's just going to blur the picture, and in times of trouble, the orders might just fall between them.
And Peter continues to stay with us in this discussion. Peter, of course, European Union now realizing how crucial it is for it to reduce reliance on the United States as far as its defense is concerned. But let's talk about the statement that's coming in from Kallas. How prepared really is the European Union, or what really does it need now to prepare to reduce that dependence on the US?
the US have demanded that NATO countries, those European countries in NATO, increase spending on defence from 3% of GDP to 5%. That's going to take another decade before we get there. In truth, there's not one European nation, including the United Kingdom, that has the ability to fight a prolonged war without the help of the United States. The UK's military has been run down significantly in the last decade. We've seen how the best of the French military was defeated by a ragtag army of militants in North Africa, in Niger, in Mali, Burkina Faso, etc. And the other European nations, as we've seen, have no appetite to put boots on the ground, as it were, as we've seen in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. They're quite happy to pump money into Ukraine to prolong the war, and I may add, while simultaneously buying Russian energy, so they were backing both sides. So Europe at the moment is in no fit state, whether it was a combined army, which would be absolutely disastrous, or individual nations that historically have been very strong militarily, such as the UK, France and Germany. The best that the European nations would be able to do at the moment would be to act as some kind of peacekeeping force, and that hasn't historically gone down well. We've seen how the Irish and Spanish failed miserably between in Lebanon. Absolutely two hopeless militaries that were not able to stop any terrorist attacks or any Israeli incursions. So the words of Callas, the rhetoric, frankly, are meaningless. The European Union, being allied with the United States, would be totally dependent on the United States to get involved in any military activity. Now, of course, the UK and France could potentially help when it comes to the Air Force and maybe the Navy. But in terms of the military, as I say, the forces have been run down. We have ill-equipped troops, and we're not up to speed as we should be, as Donald Trump has expected us to be with the increase in spending for those European countries allied to NATO.
Right. Peter, now as far as designating IRGC as a terrorist organization is concerned, France had posed a roadblock given its personnel in the embassy there in Tehran. Do you think this is soon going to be a reality if France also gets its personnel back and everybody is in a concurrence?
Okay, I think this is an indication of how far behind the curve the European Union is. To have a meeting later today or tomorrow whereby they may call the IRGC a terrorist group, such as with Hamas and Al-Qaeda, is frankly symbolic rhetoric, and truthfully will have absolutely no meaning whatsoever in practicality. What should be done, in my opinion, is that Iranian embassies in those countries should all be closed. That would be a significant act. But just to say, oh no, the IRGC are a terrorist group, so what? Really, what on earth will that do in practicality? It's just more rhetoric from the European Union. It looks as if they are anti the Iranian regime, whereas we know they would do everything they can to accommodate the Iranian regime, which they have been doing for the last 4 or 5 decades. So it's got to the point now where Donald Trump and his administration are calling the shots. He expects the European Union to act. Just by announcing them as a terrorist organisation and imposing yet more sanctions on them, frankly, is going to be meaningless.
All right, Peter, thanks very much then for your comments and for joining us here. And moving on now, viewers, US private equity firm Carlyle has agreed to purchase the majority of Lukoil's foreign assets. This sale is valued at $22 billion, and it comes as Lukoil faces pressure from US sanctions. The deal involves Lukoil's international division, which includes operations across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Central Asia, and Mexico. This deal also includes significant assets like Iraq's West Kurna 2 oil field and refineries in Bulgaria and Romania. Carlyle has also pledged to ensure operational continuity and job preservation while stabilizing the asset base. The pressure on Lukoil comes amid intensifying talks to end Russia's war efforts in Ukraine. With the US sanctions on Russian companies in place since February 2022, Lukoil has been working to sell off assets worldwide, including those in Kazakhstan, which are not part of this deal. The Carlyle is moving forward with the purchase. Other major companies, including ExxonMobil and Chevron, have also shown interest in Lukoil's assets. However, the final approval still hinges on ongoing regulatory reviews from the United States Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, as well as other regulatory bodies involved in sanction enforcement and international transactions. All right, Professor Wesleyan Popovsky, Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School, joins me in this discussion from Thailand. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Firstly, what are your first comments on Lukoil stopping its expansion?
Yes, it seems this time it may work, because we remember in October when Gunvor, another company, wanted to buy the shares of Lukoil. The United States suspected that that company is linked to Russia, and they didn't allow that to happen. But yes, this time Carlyle is very well known, large company, and based in many countries, but headquartered in the United States. And this time it may work. Lukoil, as you mentioned, have a lot of assets in 18 countries, totaling 22 billion. And it has been on sale for some time. And finally, those assets, which are mostly fuel stations, but also refineries in Romania, in Bulgaria, they need a new owner, obviously, because Lukoil, as well as Rosneft, are under sanctions by the United States. The company cannot work as it is. So the sale probably will be completed. I'm optimistic this may go ahead. And in such a deal, usually the interests are protected, and the guarantees, the insurances and everything else, so that there won't be any problem for Carlyle to acquire the Lukoil assets globally.
And how do you view the response that's coming in from Russia? Kremlin is saying it's still wanting and waiting for US response on Putin's offer to extend limits in expiring nuclear treaty.
Yes, that's a concern, obviously, and that's another leverage that Vladimir Putin is exercising, the expiry of the treaty and whether it will be prolonged or not. That's a game, and it's a dangerous game, because we all know how high are the stakes here. And unfortunately, both Vladimir Putin but also Donald Trump are chaotic, erratic, risky players. So they can play each other very well. They can try to manipulate not only between two of them, but also their own audiences. So it's a very complicated issue. And the hope is that some natural restraint will be exercised, because neither side, I will say, can benefit from escalating nuclear conversations. And for that matter, whatever they say, there could be always a suspicion that they exercise the nuclear card, but not really to threaten each other, rather than to achieve some other benefits. So it's complicated game. We have to watch and see.
Right. Right, Professor, do stay on with me as we move on. Viewers, now China is also saying that it will intensify its crackdown on cross-border scam operations following exports of executions linked to criminal networks in Myanmar. State media says Beijing has executed 11 people connected to scam compounds run by Myanmar-based gangs. At a regular briefing, China's foreign ministry said it will deepen international law enforcement cooperation to combat telecom fraud, online gambling and related crimes. Beijing described scam and gambling networks as a cancer, vowing to work with other countries to eliminate them. The announcement comes amid growing regional efforts to dismantle organized crime rings operating cross borders.
中方有关部门已经发布了消息，一段时间以来，中方同缅甸等国积极合作，打击跨境电信网络诈骗犯罪，共同铲除网赌电诈毒瘤，维护人民生命财产安全和地区国家交往合作秩序，取得显著成效。中方将继续深化国际执法合作，加大力度打击电诈网赌及其他相关跨境犯罪活动，共同铲除赌诈毒瘤。
All right, Professor Wesleyan continues to stay with us. Professor, while we are talking about public executions in more repressive regimes like Taliban, hardly any such news comes out of China because of the authoritarian regime that it is. But really, all these executions are also going on in the country. How do you respond to, the latest that's coming in?
You're right. Usually we don't hear much about the death penalties in China, but they are massive. This is the country with the most death penalties in the world. There are statistics issued by human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. Some United Nations report also do that. Yes, I'm a strong advocate against the death penalty, and I spent most of my life arguing against the death penalty. On the other hand, the fact that those scams, frauds are limited and restricted by proper measures in terms of investigating, identifying who are those behind, and taking action, sometimes severe as it might be with the death penalty, is good. That somehow the crime of cyber crimes, these are fraudsters that basically seduce some people on internet to make investment, and these are pyramids that usually basically crack down and people lose their money. And some people actually even committed suicide after that. Needs to be addressed. So it's a big crime run by networks, including some argue with the Myanmar officials in the borders between China and Myanmar. So the crime needs to be combated. And for that matter, we can agree that measures are necessary, although, as I said, death penalty is not the solution here. They should be life sentences. And we see 11 people being sentenced to death and executed, but also 28 other suspects have been convicted to various terms in jail. So the fight against cybercrime should continue, obviously.
Right. Professor, thanks then very much for joining me. And moving ahead now, viewers, dozens of people were killed in a drone attack by the paramilitary Rapid Support Force on the key Sudanese town of Dilling in South Kordofan. The attack has targeted the Sudanese Army's 54th Brigade headquarters and the central market using suicide drones. This comes just after the Sudanese armed forces broke the RSF's nearly 2-year-long siege of the town, reclaiming vital supply lines. Since the siege was lifted, Dilling has experienced multiple drone strikes, causing severe damage to infrastructure and resulting in numerous casualties. Amid these attacks, the Sudan Doctors Network has called for urgent humanitarian aid to deliver life-saving supplies to the region. The conflict, which began in April 2023, has displaced millions and caused widespread suffering, especially in areas like Kadugli, which is now facing famine. My colleague Asuma Katauka now joins us to get us more on this. Asuma, tell us more details that you're picking up.
Thank you for having me. So far we only know that through media reports, local media reports, that there was an attack and dozens were killed. As you rightfully mentioned, the suicide bombers and suicide drones that were used in this attack, which is already a besieged territory where a lot of people have been already killed. Reports show that dozens more people have been killed in this attack, and the latest attack, which took place on Wednesday this week. So this took place in the area of Diling, which includes a lot of headquarters of these Sudanese Army's 54th Brigade and some Sudanese tribal groups over there. We also know that SAF, which is the side which is affiliated with or aligned with Sudanese government, is also used to have a stronghold there. So they are fighting in that area. And Diling also lies halfway through North Kordofan and South Kordofan. So this is a central area between these two areas, and although a lot of cities have been under fire because of the 3-year war between SAF and RSF, this is a new town that has also come up under fire for now. That's all.
All right, Asuma, thanks very much then for filling us and our viewers for all that information. And with that, viewers, we're bringing you some technology news as always before we wrap up the bulletin. Now, Amazon has confirmed 16,000 corporate jobs cuts and completing a plan around 30,000 since October 2025, while leaving open possibilities of further reductions. According to reports, Amazon was planning a second round of layoffs as part of its broader goal under CEO Andy Jassy, who has been trying to reduce bureaucracy and abandon underperforming businesses. Meanwhile, Amazon has said that it was closing its remaining brick-and-mortar fresh grocery stores and Go markets despite years of effort, and it was dropping its Amazon One biometric payment system, which scans the palm of a customer's hand. And that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching NewsX World for all international news and updates.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S.
Hello and welcome
welcome to NewsX World. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching Hollywood Calling. From celebrity scoops to film and music buzz, here's your quick look at what's making headlines in entertainment this week. Chloe Zhao makes BAFTA history as Hamnet earns 11 nominations, the most ever for a female director. The awards take place on February 22nd in London. Sundance 2026 is buzzing in Park City. Channing Tatum, Olivia Wilde, and Charlie XCX premiered new films as the festival spotlights bold storytelling and fresh voices through February 1st. Nicki Minaj grabbed attention at the White House backing Donald Trump during the launch of Trump accounts, praising him openly and herself the #1 fan. Mexico's president is asking South Korea to help bring more BTS concerts to the country as huge demand, ticket shortages, and soaring resale prices spark complaints ahead of the group's global tour. Now we start with awards. Chloe Zhao is making BAFTA history this award season. Her film Hamnet has become the most nominated movie ever by a female director at the BAFTA Film Awards. The Shakespeare-inspired drama picked up 11 nominations, including Best Film, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay. Leading the overall field is Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another, with 14 nominations, followed by Ryan Coogler's Sinners with 13. This year's nominations also highlights growing diversity, with a quarter of all nominated films directed by women. The BAFTA Film Awards take place on February 22nd in London. Now looking at the Sundance Film Festival, 2026 is making waves in Park City, with several high-profile premieres. Channing Tatum, Olivia Wilde, and Charlie XCX took center stage with their films, showcasing diverse storytelling. Tatum stars in Josephine, a gripping drama about a young girl coping with trauma, earning a standing ovation after its premiere. Olivia Wilde also premiered her movie. Meanwhile, Charlie XCX debuted her self-referential mockumentary, The Moment, offering a glimpse into the end of an era. Notable premieres included Natalie Portman's The Gallerist, a sharp art world satire, and Wilde's The Invite, exploring a crumbling marriage. With buzz building for all these movies, Sundance remains the place to watch fresh, original voices in cinema. The festival runs until February 1st. Now, Hollywood star Natalie Portman has criticized the Academy Awards for sidelining films directed by women. Speaking at the Sundance Film Festival, Portman said many standout female-directed films were overlooked in this year's Oscar nominations. Announced just days earlier, Portman's own film, The Gallerist, premiered at Sundance on January 24th and is set for theatrical release later in 2026. She noted that only Chloe Zhao's Hamnet earned major recognition, securing 8 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director. The 2026 Oscar race is led by Michael B. Jordan's Sinners with a record 16 nominations, reigniting debate over gender balance in Hollywood. Now, anticipation is building for Christopher Nolan's next epic, The Odyssey, with a new teaser offering the first look at music star Travis Scott in an acting role. The brief clip aired during the NFL AFC Championship broadcast and marks Scott's on-screen debut under the Oscar-winning director. In the teaser, Scott appears leading soldiers, sharing scenes with Tom Holland and Jon Bernthal, though his character remains a mystery. The film adapts Homer's classic Greek epic and stars Matt Damon as Odysseus alongside Anne Hathaway, Tom Holland, Zendaya, and Robert Pattinson. The Odyssey is set for a worldwide theatrical release on July 17th of this year. Now for this, we welcome Mr. Shekhar Vijayan. He's a freelance entertainment writer, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World.
Hello.
Hi.
Now, looking at this, Travis Scott makes his acting debut in The Odyssey. How big of a leap is this from his music to film?
So I think there are three things to this. So one is, this is not the first time you have a musician making a debut in a movie. This is from stage presence to screen presence. And I think it works well because you also get their fans. You also get, it becomes a more fluid movement from the world of singing to the world of acting, right? So I think in the case of Travis Scott, he's built an immersive world of through music, visuals, and live performance. And I think acting covers this and much more. I think the only thing here would be whether you would be able to bring in the same intensity, bring in the same charisma, and translate it into a scripted or a character-driven medium like film. And obviously, Odyssey is one of the best. If you need to see it on screen, I really want to see how Travis Scott is really going to play the character. The second thing is it's risk versus reinvention. In today's day and age, you have to adapt yourself. You have to reinvent yourself. You have to be nimble. You have to showcase your prowess, not just in singing, but also in acting, also in coming up on screen and branding yourself, right? So this is a role for him to redefine his creative range. It also puts him under scrutiny where people are going to be criticizing him. They're going to be judging his performance, not his persona. So there's a big risk in this, and the risk just goes up 10x. The second thing is it also shows a broader shift in Hollywood in Hollywood casting. Hollywood of late has been making changes like this. They've been looking at not just regular actors coming and playing regular roles, but they're also getting musicians to come and play roles. They're also getting sportsmen to come and play roles in franchisee films. And where musicians are not just cast for novelty roles, where they're not playing musicians. Here you're getting musicians who are playing roles which are very real, very credible. It's almost like multi-hyphenate creatives who can move fluidly across entertainment. And I think we are living in a fluid world where this transition is happening as we talk, where musicians can become actors, actors can become musicians, and also sportsmen. So I think it's a very interesting world because all three of them, be it sportsmen, sportswomen, musicians, or even actors or actresses, I think they all come with a lot of fans. They all come with a lot of adulation. They all come with a lot of credibility. They all come with a lot of charisma. Now, how they are going to play this in terms of how Travis Scott is going to play this in a mammoth movie like Odyssey, which is going to be very interesting. I'm really looking forward to watching it. It's going to be very interesting to watch. More than anything else, it's also about the risk-taking appetite Travis has. It's also about his credibility, which is on the line. And it's also about him extending his persona, not just with singing, but now with appearing on screen. So I think it's a great opportunity, and I think it's something which I'm really looking forward to.
Same. Thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Vijayan. And now musicians moving into acting roles seems to be a growing trend. How does Travis Scott's debut compare to other high-profile crossovers?
See, we are talking about a movie like Odyssey. Odyssey is a book, is a heroic tale which a lot of us have read. And to bring that on the larger screen is going to be very interesting. And under the direction of Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan is known for making movies which make you think a lot, which are quite intense, very intelligent, and wonderful. And of course, he's a wonderful storyteller. So under his tutelage, under his direction, I would love to see how Travis Scott really plays his role, because it's going to be very interesting. And Christopher Nolan is a very, very different director who chooses roles, who chooses actors for his movies based on the character, based on what he wants to get out of them. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he plays it. And like I said, I think it's also, there's a great amount of risk here for Travis Scott. His persona is going to be even more interesting because you're going to see him on the big screen in the theater. And the third thing is, it's going to be an extension of what he does as a musician. I think every musician would love to, come in on screen or, extend the talent. So he also gets a wider canvas to showcase his talent. So I think it's a win-win situation at the end of the day, where there's a risk involved, but if there's no risk, then there's no reward. He's getting a beautiful director to work with, which is Christopher Nolan. And third thing, he's getting a chance to showcase his skills at a large scale, that is in the theaters. So I really don't think there's a problem there. If I was in his case, I would have jumped at this offer.
Thank you. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Shekhar Vijayan for joining us today and sharing that insight. Now, moving on, the legal battle between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively is now drawing global attention, with Taylor Swift unexpectedly pulled into the spotlight. Recently unsealed text messages show Swift discussing Baldoni and the film It Ends With Us with Lively, prompting intense public scrutiny. According to U.S. media reports, Swift is unhappy about the release of her private messages and feels exposed by their inclusion in the case. The sources say she was only trying to support Lively and did not want to be involved in the legal dispute, which has reportedly strained their friendship. The case stems from Lively's 2024 sexual harassment lawsuit against Baldoni. Both sides are now preparing for trial later this summer. Now, staying in Hollywood, Kristen Stewart is speaking out about gender bias in Hollywood following the festival run of her directorial debut, The Chronology of Water. In an interview with Variety, Stewart said female actors are often treated like puppets, while male performers and directors are taken more seriously. She said directing her own film was a stark contrast, noting she was finally treated as someone with a brain. The film premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, earning a 6.5-minute standing ovation. The Chronology of Water, co-written by Stewart, is based on Lydia Yuknavich's memoir and stars Imogen Poots. Now we move on to Paris. Paris Haute Couture Fashion Week Spring-Summer 2026 is currently underway, with the world's top fashion houses presenting their collections from January 26th through January 29th. The invitation-only showcases features 35 shows across 26 maisons, highlighting craftsmanship, innovation, and luxury design. Meanwhile, major debuts have drawn attention, with Schiaparelli opening the week. Dior unveiled Jonathan Anderson's first couture collection, and Chanel presented Matthew Blazy's debut Vision. The season is being marked by intricate handwork, nature-inspired motifs, and sculptural silhouettes, as Paris once again reinforces its role as the global capital of haute couture. Now moving the focus on to India. Indian singer Arijit Singh has announced his retirement from playback singing, ending a defining era in Bollywood music. The 38-year-old said on Instagram, "It was a wonderful journey and will complete existing projects while focusing on independent music." Singh's husky, intimate voice has been the soundtrack of heartbreak and love in India for over a decade. He rose to fame with hits like Tum Hi Ho from Aashiqui 2 and has collaborated with top composers and global artists, including Ed Sheeran. Despite worldwide fame and sold-out concerts, Singh has always shunned the spotlight. Keeping a low-profile personal life in his hometown, fans are now reflecting on his extraordinary career and wondering what comes next for one of India's most beloved voices. Now for this, we welcome Mr. Atharva Bhatt. He's a musician, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhatt, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Now, looking at this, Arijit Singh has retired from playback singing, has announced his retirement. How big of a loss is this for Bollywood music?
I feel like it's a significant loss to the industry, but not in a dramatic or an apocalyptic sense. Since Arijit Sir's contribution to the entire Indian music industry has been very substantial, he has sung around 700 plus tracks in 10 different languages. I feel like his voice and his charm will be missed in the now upcoming playlist in Bollywood and in fact the entire Indian music industry. But his retirement also marks an evolution which the industry has to take into account, given that there are a lot of other capable playback singers in the industry who now can be involved and indulged into these kind of projects where the industry has to take up different textures of voice. So in any sense, I feel like that retirement was a very conscious move by Arijit sir, and it does and it will bring a high level of evolution in the industry, because that's what is really required at the current state of Indian music industry. So yeah, I feel it will have an impact, and it still has an impact. It has left quite an impact in many of musicians like me. But yeah, it is necessary that the industry evolves, and industry experts and industry players do play around with a lot of other voice textures, so that they can bring in some new charm and some new emotion in these new tracks that Bollywood and the Indian music industry will be pushing out.
Thank you for highlighting that. And now, despite massive fame, he stayed low-key. How has this shaped his legacy as an artist?
I think Arijit sir being low-key was the reason why his legacy is going to be considered as, if not then one of the strongest in the Indian music industry. The music industry itself is a lot of involvement of theatrics on and off stage, but Arijit sir chose not to indulge into these sort of theatrics, and I think that's why he's loved by millions of people, not in India, but across the world itself. And him being a core addition to our playlist has always been about him wholly and concentratedly focusing on music and his art, and he was quite vocal about it, that he did not want to indulge in any sort of drama or controversies. And I think him being low-key is and has created a huge and significant positive impact, and that's why he's loved by millions of people in India and across the globe. So yes, it's safe to say that him being low-key did play a huge role in him being the most loved singer in India.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Atharva Bhatt for joining us today from New Delhi and sharing that insight. Thank you. Now, moving on to Mexico. Mexico's president has made a request asking South Korea to help bring more BTS concerts to the country. Claudia Sheinbaum says demand for tickets has been overwhelming, with around 1 million fans chasing just 150,000 seats for 3 shows in Mexico City. BTS is set to return with a new album, Arirang, and a global tour starting in April. After a 3-year hiatus due to military service, ticket shortages have triggered complaints and investigations into ticket sales and resale platforms, with prices soaring far above face value. Mexico is now urging tighter regulation as BTS prepares to begin its world tour in South Korea. Let's listen in to Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum.
Grupo BTS en inglés, es muy popular entre las y los jóvenes mexicanos. Van a ser en mayo los conciertos, ¿no? Y quieren comprarlo cerca de 1 millón de jóvenes. Y solo hay 150,000 boletos. Vaya este grupo. Entonces le escribí una carta al primer ministro de Corea pidiéndole que venga más veces. Todavía no recibo la respuesta, pero esperemos que sea positiva o que permitan pantallas.
Now we move the focus on to US. Nicki Minaj is calling herself the #1 fan of Donald Trump. President Trump made headlines at the White House. She attended the rollout of Trump Accounts, a new government-backed investment program for babies. Dressed in a furry white coat, Minaj hugged the president and took to the podium, saying public criticism only strengthens her support. She vowed to defend President Trump against his critics and praised him as protected by God. President Trump joked about being overshadowed and held Minaj's hand as she engaged with the audience. The rapper, who previously criticized Trump's policies, has recently praised his leadership and faith-based initiatives. Let's listen in to Nicki Minaj.
I will say that I am probably the president's #1 fan. And that's not going to change. And the hate or what people have to say it does not affect me at all. It actually motivates me to support him more. And it's going to motivate all of us to support him more. We're not going to let them get away with bullying him and, the smear campaigns. It's not going to work, okay? He has a lot of force behind him, and God is protecting him.
Now for this, we welcome my colleague and correspondent of NewsX World, Kriti Mehta. Thank you very much, Kriti, for joining us. Now, Nicki Minaj previously criticized Trump, but now praises his leadership. What do you have to say about this?
Yes, Asuma, so clearly there's a clear change towards right in Nicki Minaj's political standing, and that's in fact also created a division within her fans who are unable to understand where really that change is coming from. But anyway, like we heard and showed our viewers, Nicki Minaj has clearly gone on to this Treasury Department event and said that she is the #1 fan of US President Donald Trump. In fact, going on to say that God is with Trump. She's also said that she is not bothered by the hate that she is coming out getting for supporting Trump, and in fact also went on to add that is only going to motivate her further from supporting Trump. And in fact, her support didn't stop there. Minaj has also pledged to donate as many as between $150,000 to $300,000 for Trump's account, which is in fact an initiative for newborns where parents can invest their money and in the stock markets, and when they are 18 they can reap the benefits out of that. But it's interesting, the developments that are taking place ahead of the midterms in the United States. Nicki Minaj supporting Trump, and in fact Trump has also gone on to return that favor and called Nicki Minaj the greatest female rapper in the US history.
With that, I would like to thank Ms. Kriti for sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now, staying in the U.S. White House, U.S. First Lady Melania Trump has hosted a private screening at the White House of a new documentary about her life. The film, titled Melania, follows the 20 days leading up to President Donald Trump's second inauguration and offers rare behind-the-scenes access. It shows her role as an advisor, her diplomatic engagements, fashion choices, and moments with the president, including preparations for Inauguration Day. The documentary is backed by Amazon MGM Studios as part of a $40 million deal and will be released globally on January 30th. A public premiere is set for January 29th, with further promotions planned in the coming days. And that's a wrap on Hollywood Calling for this week. Your dose of stars, style, and stories returns soon.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs
Hello and welcome. I'm Seema Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he raises the Jimmy Lai case and Uyghur rights with President Xi Jinping. He also says talks make progress on trade, travel and resetting UK-China relations. Iran says its armed forces are ready to respond immediately to any U.S. strike. The warning comes as President Trump reiterates military threats and U.S. forces deployed to the region. EU foreign ministers are expected to list Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist group. The move follows a deadly crackdown on protests, EU's top diplomat has said. Two U.S. federal agents involved in the fatal shooting of intensive care nurse Alex Pretty during an immigration operation in Minneapolis have been placed on administrative leave. DHS says the move follows national outrage over the death and comes as protests and scrutiny of federal enforcements continue. Israel's parliament gives initial approval to the 2026 state budget. Averting an immediate early election, the spending plan still faces a tough final vote amid coalition divisions. Dozens are killed after RSF drones hit the town of Dilling in South Kordofan, local media's report. The strikes target military positions in a central market. China executes 11 people linked to Myanmar-based scam gangs. State media has reported Beijing says the move targets key figures in cross-border cybercrime. A plane crash in northeast Colombia kills all 15 people on board, including a local lawmaker. The aircraft loses contact minutes after departing Cucuta for a short flight in Ocana. Now we start with Russia-Ukraine. The Kremlin has stated that there is still room for negotiations in the standoff between Iran and the U.S., despite U.S. President Donald Trump's threat of military strikes on Iran. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has emphasized that using force would create chaos and lead to dangerous consequences in the region. The Kremlin is calling for restraint from all sides, urging a diplomatic solution to prevent further escalation. Meanwhile, France has thrown its support behind efforts to include Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on the European Union's list of terrorist organizations. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has confirmed that France will back the move, citing the IRGC's violent crackdown on protests that has left thousands of people dead. France, along with Italy and Germany, is pushing for sanctions against those responsible for the violence, signaling a strong European stance against Iran's actions. Let's listen in.
La France a annoncé hier qu'elle soutiendra l'inscription du corps des gardiens de la Révolution sur la liste des organisations terroristes de l'Union européenne, parce qu'il ne peut y avoir aucune impunité pour les crimes commis. Le courage inouï des Iraniennes, des Iraniens qui ont été la cible de ces violences ne peut rester vain. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous prendrons aujourd'hui des sanctions européennes à l'encontre des responsables de cette répression. Membres du gouvernement, procureurs, chefs d'unité de police, membres du corps des gardiens de la Révolution, responsables du blocage d'Internet. Plus de 20 individus et entités verront leurs actifs gelés et se verront interdit l'accès au territoire européen.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Ben Aris. He's a former Moscow bureau chief of the Daily Telegraph, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Mr. Aris, for joining us. Good to see you. Now thank you. Now looking at first Iran and US, although US states that, the diplomacy is open, they have been, it seems like they're piling up their military readiness in the region. So where exactly do you think diplomacy is open? And when they say diplomacy is open, what are they suggesting?
Well, diplomacy is fading away, isn't it? I mean, it used to be a rules-based international order, and now we have military assets being moved around. I mean, an armada of US naval vessels is in the Gulf now, pointing a gun at Iran, and they call this diplomacy. It's a threat, military force. Either you do negotiations, which is what they understand as diplomacy, or we bomb you. And this is happening, again and again. And the same with the diplomacy that went into Trump's quote-unquote discussion with Venezuela before Christmas, which ended up with a special military operation where they decapitated the country by kidnapping the president. And with this destruction of the international order, the rules have basically disappeared. It used to be sovereign nations, the integrity of another country was inviolable under the UN Charter, and now that counts for nothing. So the diplomacy that's actually going on, I think, is going on in the rest of the world, where the emerging markets, the global south, if you prefer, is actively building relationships, security deals, but economic deals as well, and diversifying away from Trump. And this is real diplomacy, and it's new as well, because it used to be under the auspices of the international organizations such as the IMF, the World Bank, things like that. But those Western institutions now also count for nothing. And so what's being done is real diplomacy is being done in the emerging world, in the growing world, on the basis of traditional diplomacy, where you talk about your national interests, what do you have in common, how can you help each other, and then you slot it into a broader framework of regional, multicultural, multi-country relationships. And that process is going on, and is going on excluding the West, specifically to protect ourselves from the West. And by the West, I think we mean, quote-unquote, America.
Thank you for highlighting that. And now looking at France's, stance towards Iranian security forces, I think. Why do you think France has decided to make such moves, and why is France in particular eyeing or putting focus onto Iran and onto Iran's security guards?
Well, this is the irony here, is Europe in particular still believes in the international order. I mean, the whole European Union was built on the idea of shared values and bringing together multiple countries. Because previous to the Second World War, Europe had a nasty habit of going to war with each other continuously in very bloody and long wars. And the European Union project was supposed to end that, and that was an enormous success. And so Europe really does believe in these values, because it managed to bring together what is the biggest market in the world, some 400 million people in very different cultures, different countries, and make them function together extremely successfully. And so they don't want to give up on the rules-based order. But the world has changed, and the rules-based order doesn't work anymore. So still stick to the old principles, and they still talk about sovereignty and all the old ways of seeing these things. And so Iran is in chaos. You have a democracy, an authoritarian regime. If you like, the people are very unhappy. They want change, and they're not getting it. And in Tehran, the authorities have just been mowing people down with machine guns. The estimates are vague, but something on the order of 20,000 people have been shot. That's tenfold what the previous killings have been. And Europe can't stand by and not condemn that, because it runs against everything that they believe in. But at the same time, they're powerless now, because the international order used to be backed by things like UN, and the UN could have a mandate to attack or send peacekeepers or close the sky, as it did, for example, in Libya, which went wrong. And they can't even do that. So they're helpless, and all they can do is make these statements. But as I say, they're a testament for a world, I think, that no longer exists.
Right. And lastly, as you know, you highlight rule-based diplomacy, rule-based order is losing its power or its influence now. How is this return of great power competition reshaping democracy?
Well, we go back to the 19th century. It's like who has the biggest army is in charge, and Trump has shown it that you argue with people. With Europe, the argument has been over tariffs and economics, and he's not able to use military force against Europe. But then look at Greenland. There's an example of an argument. He wants the resources, the minerals in Greenland, and there he is willing to use military force against the EU. And so, as I say, we're in a ruleless world anymore. And what do you do as a European Union? I mean, the Danes started sending troops to protect Greenland, and the idea of a US soldier killing a Danish soldier, then the whole NATO security organization or arrangements just falls to pieces immediately, which nobody wanted to do. And Europe is also in a position where it's been relying on American security since the Second World War, and suddenly Article 5, the NATO collective security agreement, doesn't count, or at least no one has any confidence in it. I mean, what happens if Russia marches into the Baltics? The Baltics were saying yesterday that they believe that Russia's going to come and invade them. And nominally they're a NATO country, nominally they're covered by Article 5, nominally as soon as the Russians cross the border, then that triggers NATO reaction, Europe will come to its military aid, and so would the States. And it's that last bit, no one has any confidence that that would happen. And then you'd end up with a direct clash between Europe and Russia. And currently the state of the European defenses is such that Russia would actually win that war and need America's help. And there's no guarantee that Trump would come to Europe's aid.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Aris, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, staying in Kremlin, the Kremlin has strongly condemned the sanctions on Lukoil, calling them illegal and unacceptable. It has emphasized that the interests of Lukoil must be respected in any dealings. However, the Kremlin has refrained from commenting on Carlyle Group's agreement to purchase most of Lukoil's foreign assets. This deal is valued at around $22 billion, and it includes Lukoil's key operations across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Mexico. The sale comes under pressure from U.S. sanctions, which have been in place since February 2022. While the deal progresses, the final approval still depends on reviews by the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Assets Control and other regulatory bodies involved in sanction enforcement. In other developments, the Kremlin is also awaiting a response from the U.S. on President Putin's offer to extend limits in the expiring nuclear treaty. It has warned that its expiry could create a significant gap in the global legal framework. The Kremlin has also offered no comments on reports of a potential ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine regarding energy infrastructure. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Ben Aris. He's joining us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Mr. Aris, for staying with us. Now, looking at the Kremlin strongly condemns these sanctions on Lukoil. Why and what more can you tell us about this situation with Lukoil?
So the Oil sanctions are a complicated topic. The headline is that, firstly, Trump has put no sanctions on Russia at all for his entire first year, except these ones. And they should be seen in the context of the negotiations in order to bring the war in Ukraine to an end, something Trump was very keen to do, something he said he'd do in 24 hours after taking office, which of course didn't happen. And the imposition of these sanctions was Trump's attempt to actually put some real tough pressure on the Putin in order to make him come to the negotiating table and do a deal, which actually seems to have been successful in so much as in December we now have a 27-point plan that's more or less agreed between the US and Russia. Lukoil in particular, why these were so effective or hurtful as sanctions, that Lukoil together with Rosneft are Russia's two biggest oil companies, and together they account for about a third of the exports. So sanctioning Lukoil on paper is very painful. In practice, the oil sanctions have completely failed because all that happened was that Lukoil's exports have sunk by 1 million barrels, and then the other state-owned companies which aren't under sanctions, suddenly their exports jumped by 1 million barrels a day. So as far as Russia's concerned and the budget, the oil sanctions make no difference. For Lukoil in particular, it's extremely damaging. And again, the sanctions on Lukoil have actually been watered down and delayed well into February. They're not in effect, but the effect on the company of the proposed sanctions has been enough to try to force it to try and basically sell all its international assets. And it has oil fields and interests all over the world, in Kazakhstan and the Middle East, and it needs to dump these. But as a sanctioned entity, doing that deal is extremely difficult. So the Kremlin is very annoyed because what you've done, in effect, is destroy one of Russia's best, and this is a privately owned company, it's extremely well run, and you've destroyed one of Russia's very best, very profitable companies, and force it into a position where it's going to have to sell all of these extremely valuable assets worth billions and billions of dollars at knockdown prices. So of course they're objecting. But as I say, in the grand scheme of things, the political goal, which has been sanction Russia, force it to end the war, take away its income, all of that didn't work.
Yes, right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Ben Aris for joining us from Berlin and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we stay in Europe. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen has said that talks between Denmark, Greenland and the United States over Arctic territory have gone well with constructive atmosphere. Although no final decisions have been made, Rasmussen has expressed cautious optimism ahead of his meeting with EU colleagues in Brussels. These diplomatic discussions come after months of tensions between Denmark and the US over President Donald Trump's repeated demands to take over Greenland despite the standoff. Rasmussen says he's slightly more hopeful than a week ago. Let's listen in.
I just want to confirm what State Secretary Rubio said yesterday, that we have had the very first meeting at senior official level in Washington yesterday regarding the Greenlandic issue. It went well in a very constructive atmosphere and tone, and new meetings are planned. It's not that things are solved, but it's good because now we are back to what we agreed in Washington exactly 2 weeks and a day ago. After that, there was a major detour. Things were escalating, but now we are back on track. And as I have stated on many occasions, we of course share the U.S. security concerns regarding the Atlantic. This is something we want to solve in close cooperation in NATO, but also in a trilateral dialogue between Denmark, Greenland, the Kingdom of Denmark and U.S. So it's not that we can conclude anything, but I'm slightly more optimistic today than a week ago.
Now for this discussion, we welcome retired Major General Sudhakarji. He's a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joins us live from Jaipur. Thank you very much, Major General, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Thank you, Aswin. Good evening.
Good evening. Now looking at the Danish side, Danish foreign minister, he seems to be giving benefit of the doubt to US. Do you think that it's the right move from the Danish side, and can it really trust US again?
Oh, no, Simple answer is no. Once bitten, twice shy. So when I say once bitten, twice shy, once bitten by a snake, even a thread should look like a snake. So I think it is too premature. I am nobody to comment on such a senior leadership of Denmark, but going by pragmatic assessment and the experience I have had in life, one should be extremely careful and be very, very cautious in dealing with USA. Not to say that USA is not capable, it is a superpower, it is got everything in it except for trust. Trust is the biggest victim in the world. Hence, to respond to your question, I would say that Denmark has to exercise caution and be very careful while dealing with such kind of stakeholders, be it anybody, be it America or any other country.
So, building on that, Major General, so what else can Denmark realistically do other than being, or giving the benefit of the doubt here to US?
Buy time. Simply buy time. Best thing in life and the universe is that when a deep wound or scar has been inflicted on us, it is just have strategic patience, apply the cure, that is the ointment. Ointment is the time, antiseptic ointment. And I'm sure nothing is permanent in life, nor in society, nor in geopolitics. Everything is bound to change. So give time a chance, and look for the best, and be prepared for the worst. That is what, because Denmark and the European countries, they have been caught napping. They never expected this to happen, and it did happen. So should it happen in future, what should be their response? Should they prepare their defenses to stand up and counter US effectively, or they should let it go, give it a pass? I think the answer is well known to each and every one of the European. And my little submission, humble submission is that it is good to talk optimistically and bring in optimism as an outcome. But I think there is an old saying, prepare and prevent, repair and repent. Back to you.
And, Major General, you say that buying time is the key here, but what if it gets worse, as you also mentioned how they should be preparing for the worst? What does their capacity, Denmark's capacity, look like, Greenland's capacity look like? How long will it take for them to prepare for the worst?
You see, no country in the world can ever prepare to prevent any kind of a conflict against the mightiest and the superpower of the world. So therefore, the only answer lies in collaborating with like-minded countries, building up a network of collaboration, support, and agreement and alliances, and keep building up keep diverting your fund allocation, your budget allocation towards defense preparedness, and start applying. Let them create a think tank within the country. What should they do? Let them apply themselves. They must have option A, option B, option C, and when it comes to, push comes to shove, well, they must have some counter strategy placed. It could be near the belly of the USA, it could be the backyard of USA, it could be the heartland of USA. So those kind of things have to be thought of for survival. Like yesterday, Kallis, the foreign relations leader, the minister of European Council, made a very good statement that it's about time they have to take some steps for survival. You cannot actually outsource your safety and security or survival to some other country. If you have to survive, that's a powerful statement. So that itself suggests and indicates that Denmark has to first and foremost divide the entire course of action into short-term, medium-term, long-term at multiple levels: strategic, that is the global level, regional level, and local, that is the national level. And when they identify, they have to look at the aspects of diplomacy, the information, they have to look at the military might, they have to look at the economy, to the technology. Denmark enjoys lots of supremacy in their technological advancement. If we go into it, it is not only the renewable energy. They have got lots of things in which they can create leverage. So they need to actually have a matrix of leverages which can be applied effectively in short, medium and long term at global, regional and national level. That will give them possibly some solution to protect them in future, as also go in for a kind of a coalition and alliances in order to build up their national military might. That would actually give them some effective and meaningful answer. Back to you, Asuma.
Thank you for sharing that deep insight with us, Major General. Thank you. Now moving on to China. China's defense ministry has confirmed that a probe into 2 former high-ranking Chinese generals is a major achievement. The investigation focuses on Zhang Yuxia, the second in command under President Xi Jinping as vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, who has long been considered Xi's closest military ally. Alongside Zhang, Liu Zhenli, the chief of staff of the CMC's Joint Staff Department, is also under investigation for suspected serious violations of discipline and law. The Defense Ministry has emphasized that despite these probes, China continues to engage in talks with the militaries from around the world. Let's listen in.
我们坚决反对对中方有关反腐行动的污蔑抹黑。中国军队在党的坚强领导下，始终秉持开放合作理念，将继续与各国军队开展对话交流，深化军事互信，加强务实合作，为国际和地区和平稳定贡献中国力量。坚决查处张又侠、刘振立是党和军队反腐败斗争取得的重大成果，是党和军队有决心、有力量的重要体现，对于打赢军队反腐败斗争攻坚战、持久战、总体战具有重要意义。
Now for this, we welcome back retired Major General Sudhakarji. He's joining us from Jaipur. Thank you very much, Major General, for staying with us. Now, what are we to make of these, high-ranking officials being taken away, and the Chinese military saying that this is this is for suspected serious violation of discipline and law?
Asuma, I personally feel that the current situation, firstly, what has happened? You see, out of 7 members in the Politburo, less for Z, rest all have been purged. There is no one else. The vice chairman himself is the topmost, I would say, highest official who is to enjoy the loyalty, the blessings of Z so far in almost everything. And he has been purged on account of disloyalty, kind of espionage, leaking information on nuclear security to USA, and not reining in the people in the PLA who have been found lacking discipline, etc., etc. So with him gone, now there is a vacuum. Now, selecting people for the Politburo is a long-drawn process. It takes lots of time, deep investigation, scrutiny, goes into the personality profile, and based on the experience of multiple stakeholders, all 7 of them, they are selected. Thereafter, Z has to actually scrutinize himself. He has to satisfy. So this is a long-drawn process. It's going to take a lot of time. Now, going by the timelines and the agenda which China has, China on its own had already made up the mind that by 2027, they would be reunifying Taiwan. So first thing that comes to my mind is, will it be possible under the circumstances with lack of experience? The vice chairman, the Zhao, who has been ousted or purged, he is the only person in China or PLA who has had some experience of conflict a long time back in 1979 against Vietnam. Barring him, there is nobody else. So in absence of any kind of experience in any conflict or war or battle, they will be lacking. This will become highly acute and unprecedented. Second thing is, experience in warfare actually matters a lot. You need to have guides, philosophers, friends to do mentoring, to channelize, formulate correct policies in the country. China's modernization of armed forces started in the year 2015. They have lots of flip-flops, lots of pitfalls, and recently they have introduced two different wings for arms. One is the space, the other is the cyber. Now, both the things, they require lots of deft handling. Is Z capable to handle these things directly? I doubt if he is possible. Therefore, it brings me to the point that not only the vacuum will continue to remain as a vacuum, but it will result in a telling impact on the structure, on the design, on the outcome of preparation of People's Liberation Army as also PLAN and PLAF, which consequently will impact on the high-end objective of reunification Taiwan as also maintaining law and order and solidarity and discipline amongst the PLA, because there is a inner revolution, discontentment which is rising within PLA and within China, which is the most dangerous threat to the existence of Z.
With that, I would like to thank retired Major General Sudhakarji for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you. Now, moving on to tech news, the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has opened an investigation after a Waymo self-driving vehicle struck a child near a school in Santa Monica, California last week. The incident occurred on January 23rd when the child ran across the street from behind a double-parked SUV and the Waymo vehicle was unable to avoid the contact. The child sustained minor injuries but quickly stood up and walked to the sidewalk. Waymo has stated that its vehicle detected the child and braked hard, reducing speed from 17 mph to under 6 mph before the collision. Authorities are investigating whether the Waymo vehicle exercised proper caution given the proximity to the school during drop-off hours with children and other pedestrians in the area. The agency is also looking into the vehicle's behavior in school zones, especially during high traffic times. Meanwhile, Waymo has said it will cooperate fully with the investigation. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
first thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Kriti Mehta. We turn our focus today to a diplomatic gambit in the East. The first trip by a British Prime Minister to Beijing in 8 years. Prime Minister Keir Starmer arrived in the Chinese capital seeking what he calls a more sophisticated and pragmatic relationship. But behind the handshakes at the Great Hall of the People lies a minefield of past sanctions, rising tariffs, and a massive trade gap. So what is the state of this high-stakes reset? Let's look at the numbers. Total bilateral trade between the UK and China has hit £103 billion in 2025. But the balance is strikingly lopsided. The UK exports roughly £30 billion to China, while importing over £72 billion. This is a £42 billion trade deficit. China is currently the UK's